My dear children, today's topic is development of psychology in India. And psychology in India was influenced by Western psychology. So children, you have to know the development of psychology in India. And now, children, with the initiatives of Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee, the Vice Chancellor of Calcutta University, the psychology of the Western origin was first introduced as a subject in philosophy department of Calcutta University. And children, you know already and the roots of psychology and the main subjects of psychology. And in 1915, the modern era of Indian psychology began in the Department of Philosophy at Calcutta University, and where the first syllabus of experimental psychology was introduced and first psychology laboratory was established. Next, in 1916, Calcutta University started the first department of psychology. Children, please remember year. And next, 1922, Professor Girindra Shekhar Bose established Indian Psychoanalytical Association. Yes, the Indian Psychoanalytical Association. And Professor Bose was first doctor, that means received PhD in psychology at Calcutta in 1922 on the work of repression. Repression is one kind of defense mechanism. Yes. And he published a famous book entitled Concept of Repression in 1921. Yes. And now, 1928, N.N. Sengupta and Radhakamal Mukherjee published the first textbook on social psychology. The name of this book, The Introduction of Social Psychology, in 1928. Next, in 1938, Department of Applied Psychology in Calcutta University. Yes. And in 1943, Applied Psychology was started and a certificate course in Applied Psychology was started in 1945. Yes. And this year was a remarkable year in the history of Indian psychology. Why? An eminent psychologist like Jung, Spearman had been invited to the Science Congress. Yes. And Jung was also awarded honor degree by Calcutta University. And now next, 1949, Psychological Research Wing of the Defence Science Organization of India is established. And 1954 and then 1955, the NIMHANS, the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, and remember the full form of NIMHANS, is established at Bangalore. Yes. And next, in 1962, Hospital for Mental Diseases in Ranchi is established. And in 1986, you know, the Durganand Sinha, in his book, The Psychology in a Third World Country, The Indian Experience, published in 1986. Yes. And traces the history of modern psychology as a social science in India in 4 phases. Yes. The first phase, till independence, was a phase, and just emphasis on experimental and psychoanalytical and psychological testing research. Yes, you know already the concept of psychoanalysis, and which primarily reflected the development of the discipline in Western countries. And next, second phase till the 1960s was a phase of expansion of psychology in India into different branches of psychology. Branches, you know, counseling psychology, clinical psychology, industrial and organizational psychology, developmental psychology, social psychology, political psychology, school psychology, etc. Yes, and during this phase, an Indian psychologist just showed a desire to have an Indian identity by seeking to link Western psychology to the Indian context. That is important. Yes. And now, you know, next phase. And psychologists became more focused on addressing the problems of Indian society. That is important. And limitations of excessive dependence on Western psychology for our social context were also realized. The culture is important, you know, for our behavior. Society is important also. And during, you know, 50s and 60s, there were three factors that shaped the nature of Indian psychology during the 50s and the 60s. The first is the construction of Indian personality and culture by the foreign scholars, separation of psychology from the philosophy department that deprived Indian psychologists from the opportunity to draw on the ancient body of knowledge, and higher susceptibility of Indian psychologists towards Western influences in the absence of one's own conceptual framework. And as a result, children, some noticeable changes in the content and quality of Indian research and psychology were seen. And result, you know, a number of studies were conducted to identify the unique feature of Indian culture. And already you know the culture is important in society, is important. Yes. So now, next, this trend was also reflected in some attempts to develop psychological approaches based on traditional Indian psychology. Yes, and which came from our ancient texts and scriptures. And you know, children, in that time, and Upanishad and Bhagavad Gita and Vedanta, the concept of Vedanta, yoga, and that time, you know, much to contribute. Yes. So, and the other important, you know, indigenous psychology. What is the meaning of it, indigenous? And originating in and characteristics of a particular region or country. That is the meaning of indigenous. Originating in and characteristics of a particular region or country means originating naturally in a region. Yes. So, indigenous psychology is defined by Kim and Berry, 1993. You know, the scientific study of human behavior or mind that is native, that is not transported from other regions, and that is designed for its people. Okay, what is indigenous psychology? Yes. So, this phase is characterized by the development in indigenous psychology, which originated from the Indian cultural context and was relevant for society and Indian psychology based on the Indian traditional system. Yes, children. So now it has become more contextual and importance the need for developing psychological principles and which are rooted in our own social and cultural context. And now various important part in Indian psychology. Yes, and you know, at present there are 4 professional organizations of Indian psychology. An Indian Psychological Association IPA established in 1925, and Indian Academy of Applied Psychology established, and Indian Association of Clinical Psychology, and then 1989 National Academy of Psychology, and 1997 National Brain Research Center is established. And significant persons in Indian psychology: N.N. Sengupta, and trained in USA in the experimental tradition of Wundt. You know already who is Wilhelm Wundt. Professor Girindra Shekhar Bose, trained in Freudian psychoanalysis, and Professor Bose. And now the applied fields and in where, and we just apply the fields of various fields and various principles, various knowledge of psychology. Yes. So applied fields of psychology, you know, hospitals, organizations, sports fields, developmental sectors, and IT industry. You know, and nowadays the demands of psychology, the importance of psychology, and everywhere, and we can apply the knowledge and principles of psychology everywhere. Yes. And you know, hospitals, organizations, sports fields, various kinds of organizations, school, college, and IT sector, IT industry, and NGO. And now, in psychology has greatly expanded in scope. Yes, and attention is increasingly being paid to the study of not only academically stimulating problems related to cognitive process and personality processes, motivational and emotional processes, and human development, but also to issues, you know, affecting society at large. Yes, such as prejudice, discrimination, class 12. Yes, and you will read what is prejudice, what is discrimination, what is stereotype, and how can we reduce prejudice, discriminations, and socialization also, class 11. You read what is socialization, what are the different agents of socialization, and read also moral development, morality, and organizational development, and gender related problems, gender stereotypes, leadership style, suffering and healing, stress management. Yes. Thank you, my dear children.